Hello and welcome to another episode of Disasters in History. This week we are going to cover the week of February 1st to February 7th. So, without further ado, we will start with February 1st. And from this image, you will likely have an idea of what we are going to talk about. This is the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster on February 1st, 2003. At 9 a.m. on February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia was re-entering Earth's atmosphere over Texas and Louisiana when it suddenly disintegrated, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. The cause of the sudden disintegration was due to damage to the front portion of the left wing of the shuttle. During takeoff, a piece of foam separated from the bipod connecting the space shuttle to the external tank and struck the left wing of the shuttle. This damaged the reinforced carbon-carbon covering that protected the aluminum skin of the shuttle from re-entry temperatures of 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. As a reminder, aluminum melts at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The strike of the foam was observed by video taken of the takeoff and was continuously analyzed by a debris assessment team from NASA to try to determine what, if any, potential damage could occur from the foam hitting the wing. It's important to note that this was not the first time that foam had struck the shuttle on takeoff coming from this area of the external tank. This was the first time that it obviously led to a space shuttle, disintegrating upon re-entry. At one point, the debris team requested imaging of the wing of the Columbia to try and analyze photographic evidence of the wing, but it was rescinded by the mission management team within 90 minutes of the request being placed, as it was made outside of command and it was deemed by mission management unnecessary and a waste of time. Essentially, the debris assessment team contacted the Department of Defense to try and move some satellites into place so that they could potentially view the wing of the Columbia in order to see if there was any damage that could be cause for concern. It's not exactly known if it was possible to get imaging of the wing to know for certain whether or not it was damaged. However, it was determined by the mission management team that it was unnecessary and they didn't need to do it, so they didn't do any imaging whatsoever. In the end, both the debris assessment team and the mission management team determined there was no risk to the shuttle and informed the crew aboard the Columbia that there had been a strike and there was no concern for their re-entry. Now, it's important to note here that the mission management team decided before the debris assessment team that there was no risk to the shuttle. There were concerns from the debris assessment team that there actually was risk to the shuttle, but they, combined with previous debris strikes as well as the current one and what they could see from the video, they didn't think that it would be that catastrophic. In any event, it almost didn't really matter if there was damage or not because, well, they didn't really have a plan in place for how to fix it if there was. The International Space Station wasn't done yet. They didn't have any way to dock to it in the first place. It would take a lot of effort. They couldn't go out on an actual spacewalk to do repairs to the wing up there because they didn't have enough material. They would have to take it from somewhere else and put it on the wing and hope that that was enough and it would allow them re-entry. It was also concerned that there wasn't enough oxygen on board the Columbia to last until they could get another shuttle up into space to get them aboard that shuttle and then bring Columbia back down unmanned. It was even if they did determine that there was a problem before the Columbia made re-entry, there's no guarantee that they actually could have saved the astronauts, but at least they could have tried something. At this point, with how they determined there was no risk to the crew, they obviously didn't try anything. So, on February 1st, at 8:44 a.m., the shuttle re-entered Earth's atmosphere at an altitude of 400,000 feet, during which the damage to the covering allowed hot air to enter the wing and begin to melt the aluminum structure. It would take until 8:58 a.m. for the crew inside the shuttle to realize anything was wrong. Communication was lost from the Columbia at 8:59 a.m., with the last known communication being, quote, Roger, from the commander of the shuttle, Colonel Rick Husband. The last manual input from those inside the shuttle was at 9 a.m., in which they switched the autopilot to manual control, then back to automatic, indicating at least some of the crew was still conscious and able to perform some functions. Just 15 seconds later, the shuttle blew apart, killing all 7 astronauts. Now, one of the things that you need to note here, this is the actual takeoff of Columbia. And watching this GIF, if you will, you can see this big old piece of foam come off the external tank, strike the front of the wing. It is about the size of a briefcase. You can see it right in here. You hit it, it breaks off, and it comes down here and falls into this. This was analyzed over and over and over again. This was the only view of the actual foam strike. So what exactly came off and caused the issue? Well, let me break out my handy-dandy whiteboard here. All right, so you have your shuttle, like so. Right? You got your wing, like this, like a normal airplane, right? And then you have your giant external tank like this that holds fuel for takeoff, right? I went off my whiteboard a little bit. Let me fix that. So you got your giant external tank like so. Now, in this area right here, obviously the shuttle has to be connected to the external tank somehow. So what they did was essentially there is a bipod like this. It is a triangle. You have your shuttle here, and you have your external tank here. This area in here is covered by foam on either side in order to help with insulation for the external tank and all of that. This piece of foam right here, this one right here, is what broke off and struck the wing right here. And it struck the very front part of the wing. Unfortunately, that front part of the wing is obviously going to be exposed to the most temperature, the highest temperature, I should say, the highest temperature upon re-entry into the atmosphere. So when they came in, there was that little tiny hole, all of those gases, all of those hot air gases. So let's do a little drawing here. So you've got your wing coming out like this. You got your body of your shuttle right here, like so. You have a nice little hole right in this area right here. So as re-entry occurs, all of your hot gases coming down into the atmosphere, going at however many miles per hour, are flowing along the front of this wing on either side, right? They're going up and over, right? Now, normally you have a solid wing and all that heat is being deflected up over top of it. However, because of that hole from the foam strike, it's all going inside of the wing here. Now, the inside of this wing is an aluminum structure. That aluminum melts at about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's being exposed to, 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot. It's the upper reaches of the inside of flashover inside of a house fire. So it's going to start very quickly melting that aluminum structure, and it's going to eventually disintegrate the wing, disintegrate the actual interior of the shuttle, and then cause it to break apart, which is what happened. So that's pretty much what happened here. There were numerous investigations and a lot of changes that were made in order to prevent future foam strikes. The loss of the Columbia Space Shuttle caused the shuttle program to be shut down until 2005 for changes to be made to the program to prevent future disasters, and also set up contingency plans in case something like this happened again. They would have some form of rescue operation be in place so that if they have a shuttle that they cannot safely bring back down, they'll have some form of backup plan to go get them versus just tell them nothing was wrong, there's no concerns, and then suddenly they explode into a bunch of pieces. The search for the remnants of the Columbia is one of the largest man-made or manpower searches in history. It covered a huge area, and there was, in the aftermath, people found pieces of the Columbia everywhere and would place them on eBay trying to sell them. And the U.S. government was like, hey, that's a crime. You have 3 days to turn it in. Otherwise, you're going to get arrested. And a lot of people did eventually turn in their stuff. Our next disaster this week is on February 2nd, 2007. At around 3 a.m. on February 2nd, 2007, the first tornado of a 4-tornado outbreak touched down near Wildwood, Florida. This tornado is historical, as it was the first tornado to be rated using the enhanced Fujita scale instead of the Fujita scale. This first tornado would travel due east, causing 8 fatalities and over $100 million worth of damage, and receive an EF3 rating. This same supercell storm would produce a second EF3 tornado that caused 13 fatalities, making it the third deadliest tornado in Florida history, and making the Groundhog Day tornado outbreak the second deadliest in Florida history. It literally took a little over 26 hours after the enhanced Fujita scale was implemented at midnight on February 1st, 2007, for it to receive its first tornadoes, which is highly unusual. And 2007 is going to be one of those years that has several famous tornadoes. It is one of the only it has one of the only tornadoes that has both an official F rating and an official EF rating, which happened in April. I'll talk about later. But this one in particular is interesting because this tornado outbreak was likely more prolific than just 4 tornadoes. Watching the radar from this day in 2007, there were several more tornadoes that likely occurred offshore in Florida because the storm system moved relatively quickly. So there were probably maybe 8 or 9 total tornadoes, with at least half to the majority of them occurring offshore, which obviously don't receive ratings because they don't do any damage on land, and there's no damage to be done in the ocean unless it hits a boat or something. Which, now that I think about it, I wonder if there has been a explicitly offshore tornado that received, or not explicitly, exclusively offshore tornado that received a rating because it struck a boat. I know there have been tornadoes that only struck boats, but that would be pre-EF scale. There was one in... there's a famous one in just off the shore in Sicily. Oh boy, I can't remember what the year was. It was a long time ago, like hundreds of years ago. I'll have to do some research and let you guys know. But yeah, this was the first tornado to receive an EF rating. And it was an EF3. It was actually the first 2 tornadoes were EF3 tornadoes in Florida, of all places. Our next disaster is the day the music died. And they were singing, "Bye, bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry." Anyway, bad singing aside, if you know the song American Pie by Don McLean, it is based on an actual day, February 3rd, 1959, otherwise known as the day the music died. So on February 3rd, 1959, a Beechcraft Bonanza plane carrying musicians Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper, crashed near Clear Lake, Iowa. The 3 musicians had been participating in the music tour entitled The Winter Dance Party. This tour was generously terribly managed. Every single night was a different show in a different city, which led to the musicians spending hours in a bus with no heating in the deep winter in the Midwest. Temperatures ranged from 20 degrees Fahrenheit to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the buses regularly broke down once in negative 20 degree Fahrenheit weather, which caused one of the band members to get frostbite as they tried to stay warm by burning newspapers inside the broken down bus. By the time they reached Clear Lake, Iowa, they were expected to play a show the next day in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is a 5-hour drive in good conditions, which also put them back through several towns that they had already played in. Buddy Holly was tired of this, so he chartered a plane for himself and his 2 band members, Tommy Alsop and, famously, Waylon Jennings. The Big Bopper had come down with a sickness and asked Waylon Jennings if he could take his spot on the plane to try and get more rest, and Jennings agreed. When Buddy Holly heard Jennings had given up his seat, he jokingly told Jennings, "I hope your damned bus freezes up." Jennings replied, "I hope your old plane crashes." That sentence would haunt Waylon Jennings for the rest of his life on his way to becoming a music legend in his own right. Meanwhile, Ritchie Valens also asked Tommy Alsop if he could take his seat, and they decided to flip a coin for it. Valens called heads and won the seat. Afterwards, he said, "This is the first time I've ever won anything." Just after midnight on February 3rd, the three musicians and their pilot, Roger Peterson, took off from Clear Lake Airport. The weather at the time was dark and heavily overcast, and most of the flight would have to be by instruments only. The problem was, Peterson was not cleared to fly by only instruments, and the plane he was flying had a gyroscope that was inverted from what he was used to. In the gyroscope he was used to, the top was the sky and the bottom was the ground. So if you were pointing up, you were heading up. In the plane he was flying, it was the opposite. So let me break out my whiteboard here to explain this a little bit. Okay. So we have our gyroscope. It is like this. Let me erase there we go. So what he was used to, so this blue line is your plane. This is your plane's orientation right here. Now, what he was used to was that if you pointed up on this gyroscope, if you pointed this direction, the nose of the plane was going up. If you pointed down, the nose of the plane was going down. This is what he trained on. This is what he was used to. This is not how the plane that they were flying that night worked. The plane they were flying that night was like this. So you have your same, like this. This blue line is your orientation. Your horizon is the middle. If you were pointing down, the nose, let's draw a plane here real quick. Fantastic plane. You have your wing. This is the nose. This is the tail. If you were pointing down on this gyroscope, your nose was going up. If you were pointing, let me do this way. Your nose was pointing up. If you were pointing up, like so, the nose was pointing down. So keep that in mind as we continue to talk about what actually happened here. So, about 6 miles northwest of the airport, the plane struck the ground at about 170 miles per hour with the nose down in a 90-degree banked turn. So they took off, went up into the sky. The air traffic control tower at Clear Lake, Iowa was able to watch them until they disappeared into the clouds. They were moving in a northwesterly direction, and about 6 miles northwest of the airport, the plane struck the ground at about 170 miles per hour, which is more or less full speed for this plane. It can go a little bit faster, but that's more or less the speed they would expect it to be traveling towards Minnesota itself. The right wing struck the ground first and sent the plane tumbling through the air before coming to rest against a fence in the cornfield. The three musicians were ejected from the plane and killed instantly. The pilot was trapped in the cockpit of the plane and also died instantly. As the wreck was discovered the next morning, the news was immediately broadcast over television and radio, and both Buddy Holly's new wife, Maria Elena Holly, who was pregnant, and his mother found out over the television and radio. The news hit Maria hard, and she miscarried their child soon after the crash. They had only been married for about 6 months at this point. Buddy Holly's mother collapsed after hearing the news report. Because of this crash and the impact it had on Buddy Holly's family, a new policy was adopted, essentially countrywide, to notify family members of the deaths before releasing the names to the public. Now, when he was traveling, the pilot had a pilot's license. However, he had only passed the written test for being able to fly instruments only. He was only allowed to fly with visual flight rules. The owner of the airplane that he was flying, their entire company was only qualified to fly with visual flight rules. At the time, it was the middle of the night. It was just after midnight. It was lightly snowing. The clouds were incredibly low. And Clear Lake, Iowa, today is generously in the middle of nowhere. In 1959, it was literally the middle of nowhere. There would have been essentially zero lights to be able to tell what was ground and what was sky. In addition, because this gyroscope was opposite of what he was used to, it's likely that he thought he was pointing the nose upward and was actually pointing it down and was attempting to turn, and realized at the very last second that they were headed towards the ground, attempted to turn, struck the ground, and that was the end of it. This became known as the day the music died because Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Richie Valens were some of the biggest music stars, budding music stars at the time. All of these shows were essentially sold out. The reason that they continue to do shows night after night after night is because of how popular these musicians were at the time. Our next disaster happened on February 4th, 1977. On that day, the Ravenswood train in Chicago, Illinois was waiting on the tracks for the Evanston Express train to move so it could proceed ahead. Because of this delay, the Lake Dan Ryan train would also need to stop and wait. But against the in-cab warnings and the warning lights on the track, the engineer of the Lake Dan Ryan train moved forward out of the station and drove directly into the back of the Ravenswood train. The collision was only at about 10 miles per hour and probably would have only caused a minor delay had something different happened. You see, instead of stopping the train when he struck the other train, the engineer continued to apply traction power to the Lake Dan Ryan train. This continued to push his train into the back of the Ravenswood train, eventually causing the first three cars to derail and fall off the elevated track, which you can see in the background here. So you can see car here, car here, car here. This caused 11 fatalities when they fell off the track and over 180 injuries in the derailed passenger cars. Now, this is one of those disasters that is incredibly unusual because we have genuinely no idea why he continued to apply traction control, why he continued to push his train into the back of another train that he had already struck. It's not like he hit it and then it immediately derailed. He hit it, continued to push even harder, like he was, trying to push the train ahead of him to go, and then it derailed. He never explained why. They never got him to admit why, and he was fired 6 months after the accident. So it's one of those things that's very, very, very unusual that we don't really have a good explanation. It's likely that he was distracted when they first collided, but to continue to add even more power is incredibly unusual. It's still one of the deadliest disasters on the Chicago Loop in its entire history. Our next disaster is kind of a disaster, kind of isn't a disaster. It depends on your opinion on losing nuclear bombs. On February 5th, 1958, an F-86 fighter jet performing in a training exercise over South Carolina and Georgia collided with a B-47 bomber carrying a Mark 15 nuclear bomb. The pilot of the jet ejected and safely parachuted and landed. The B-47 bomber carrying the nuclear bomb dropped from 38,000 feet to 20,000 feet before the pilot managed to regain control of the plane. But because of the damage caused by the collision, the pilot requested to eject the nuclear bomb in order to be able to land safely. He was given permission and ejected the bomb near Tybee Island, Georgia. After they ejected the bomb, it never detonated. Several searches have been conducted in the area, but the nuclear bomb has never been found. Whether or not the bomb actually contained a plutonium cap has never been conclusively determined. Some Air Force documents state it was a fully armed nuclear bomb. Some state it had a dummy lead cap. Either way, the bomb itself contained 400 pounds of high explosives and enriched uranium. It still remains missing. to this day, as of right now, February 17th, 2026, there is a nuclear bomb somewhere near Tybee Island, Georgia. Don't know exactly where. Don't know if it can explode. Maybe, maybe not. It's one of those things that's fascinating. It's one of only 2 nuclear weapons that the United States has ever admitted to losing. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it's the only one that's actually in the continental United States. And that brings us to our last disaster of the week, the 1958 Munich plane disaster. On February 6, 1958, the Manchester United football team was returning from playing a match against Red Star Belgrade in the European Cup. The plane they were taking was unable to fly from Belgrade, Yugoslavia to Manchester, England, so they had to stop over in Munich, West Germany to refuel. On board was the entire Manchester United team, coaches, several reporters, and some fans. During their initial takeoff, the engine was acting unusual, so they aborted. Essentially, they were running on fuel too rich, and it was causing the engine to not run properly. During the second takeoff, the same thing happened, so that takeoff was aborted as well. After the second takeoff, the 44 passengers and crew disembarked from the aircraft while the captain and the maintenance crew discussed what was wrong with the plane. As they did so, it began to snow heavily in the area, leading to the buildup of slush on the runway. Now, during the first attempted takeoff, they opened the throttle on the engine normally. That led to the issues with the engine that they couldn't quite get the power that they wanted. So, believing that if they opened the throttle slower on the second takeoff, they wouldn't have as much problems with the fuel being too rich. So they opened it slower. Again, still had the same problem. After they disembarked, the captain and the maintenance crew got together and they discussed that, okay, if we opened it too fast the first time, medium the second time, what if we open it even slower the third time to maybe see if that will fix the problem? It didn't really have an issue with the actual takeoff itself because the runway was very long, about 2 kilometers, so they would have plenty of room to be able to get up to speed in order to take off, even if they had to open the throttle even slower. So they had everybody reboard. One player, Billy Whalen, said as they boarded the plane, quote, "This may be death, but I'm ready." Several of the players, including Whalen and one of the journalists, moved to the back of the plane, believing it to be safer. As they traveled down the runway for takeoff, the plane reached V1 speed, which, if you don't know, is the speed in which it would no longer be possible to abort the takeoff. Expecting to continue to speed up, the plane suddenly slowed down inexplicably. The slush that had built up on the runway slowed the plane down enough that it could not take off, but not enough that they could stop before the end of the runway. The plane skidded off the end of the runway, through a fence, the left wing struck a house and was sheared off, causing the house to burst into flames, which had a woman and her 2 kids in it who did successfully make it out alive. The tail of the plane was ripped off, the left side of the fuselage struck a tree, and the right side of the fuselage struck a barn. Inside that barn was a fully loaded fuel truck, which then burst into flame, which ignited the plane itself. Now, on board the plane itself, the goalkeeper for Manchester United, Harry Gregg, managed to kick a hole in the fuselage and rescue several of his teammates and others. Everyone who had moved to the rear of the plane prior to takeoff, including Billy Whalen, died in the crash. Now, why exactly did the plane start to slow down despite having reached that minimum speed to be unable to take off safely? So, in order to, explain this again, we're going to break out the handy dandy whiteboard because you guys know I love a whiteboard. So, let's say you have a runway. You got your runway like this. Now, in a normal takeoff, let's draw our plane here. We have plane like so, wing, plane goes down the runway. As it picks up speed, the front lifts up, the tail follows, it takes off, flying that direction, right? Makes sense. Whole 9 yards. Now, let's say You also have snow falling down. And you take 20, 30 minutes to figure out why your plane's not taking off. As you're doing so, the snow starts to build up on the runway. Now, because this is an active runway, this is snow buildup. Now, because this is an active runway, you still have planes taking off. You have maintenance crew working to clear the snow, whole 9 yards. It's going to be wet. There may be a little bit of slush, but for the majority of the runway, you're not going to have any slush. And this is a really long runway. Again, like 1.2 miles, 2 kilometers long. It's very long. And the majority of planes are going to take off well before the end of the runway because they're not having this engine issue. They're going to take off as quickly as they can, get up, get out, the whole 9 yards. So, as this plane is going down, the majority of the runway is clear. He's slowly opening the throttle, remember. The pilot, gets up to V1 speed, continuing on this direction. But because he has to open the engine, the throttle significantly slower, it's taking a longer time to get up to those speeds. He gets up to V1 speed, suddenly it starts to increase, and then it stops, and then it drops. So what happened? Well, if you think about this, you have your plane going. Actually, let's just throw it in a different direction to take it away from takeoffs and planes and all of that. Imagine you were pushing a shopping cart, okay? You're going through the parking lot. It's everywhere around the front of the grocery store is completely clear, but you get further out in the parking lot, there's a layer of snow. You're pushing along, you're running along, all of a sudden you hit that slush and your shopping cart kind of noses down and it slows significantly as soon as it hits that slush. The reason it's slowing down is because the slush is creating friction on those wheels and making it move slower. It's the same thing in an airplane. However, it's particularly bad for this particular aircraft and also most modern aircrafts, to be honest. So, the reason it's particularly bad for this Ambassador airplane, which is the one they were flying, is because at the time in 1958, the majority of airplanes still were tail wheel airplanes. So, this airplane, a normal airplane that you think about, has a wheel here and two wheels in the back. At the time, let me draw a second airplane here. At the time, most airplanes had their wheel in the back here and then their wheels under the wings here, like so. So, if you hit this slush, it's going to hit these wheels here, which isn't going to cause this downward force because the friction is back here under the back side of the wing, so it'll slow it down some, but generally your engine can overpower that friction and it's not pulling it down. With your wheel in the front, it's hitting the friction here and it's forcing that nose down here because it's slowing down, so it's kind of going like this and then bucking down. So, if this plane had a tail wheel, it's not going to have this force down. You hit your friction here, your wheels are going to lift up still. Your wheel in the back may have some friction, but again, you're mostly in the air. You can use some extra engine speed to get the rest of the plane off of the ground. Here, when it hits that, as you're trying to get going, it's going to slow it down and you're going to have that jerk of that loss of momentum as that friction hits that wheel and causes the front of the plane to go down. So when he hits this slush, as he gets down here towards the end of the runway, he gets pulled down. He can't power through it because it's pulled it down so far, and he can't open the throttle enough because of that rich fuel mixture. It is a perfect storm of terrible options. He can't open the engine all the way because the fuel mixture is all jacked up and the engine's not working properly. He has run out of runway because he's hit the slush. He can't get going faster because even though your engines are up on your wings, you still have to deal with the friction of the wheels on the ground before you can actually get up into the air. Essentially, they ran out of real estate. If he had, an extra half a kilometer or kilometer of runway left, he might have been able to save it. But because of how long it took them to get going, that force and that friction of the slush as they were going through it, it forced the plane down and caused them to go off the end of the runway and crash into the house, the barn, and then kill 8 of the Manchester United players, 8 reporters, 3 of the crew, and then at least 1 fan. Now, part of the reason that they were still trying to make it after the second takeoff attempt failed, there was a belief that if Manchester United did not make it to Manchester to play in their next match, they would be deducted points from the table, and there would be several other penalties given to the club. So in order to prevent that, they tried to take off anyway, obviously. Now, they lost 8 players. The team was called Busby's Babes. The actual manager, the man by the name of Busby, ended up in the hospital. He would end up coming back. They would win significantly more after this. But the next game that they played, the next match that they played, they printed out programs for each game. The Manchester side, which is, if you're not familiar with soccer terminology, is basically the lineup, the starting lineup. Instead of putting in the names of the people that they got to replace them, which was mostly injured people and youth players and things like that, instead of putting their names on that side, they just left them blank in the starting lineup where the people who died would have been. Several of the players who were in the plane were so injured they never played again, and it became one of those things that kind of has a lasting legacy at the Manchester United Football Club. And so with that, we've reached the end of this week's Disasters in History. I appreciate you all for being here, watching, listening. I appreciate you all. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, do all those things. You're all adults. You know how YouTube works. So thank you guys so very much, and I look forward to making more.